Right, well, welcome everybody. It's a pleasure to see you, and whether you're watching or listening online or here with us in the Edmund Safra Lecture Theatre at Saïd Business School, it's my pleasure to host this afternoon's Distinguished Speaker Seminar. This is a series that we started several years ago, giving not just our students but our whole community, our alumni and our corporate community and the public a chance to have a deep dive into some of the expertise and some of the experience of business leaders and political and NGO leaders from around the world. So it is my pleasure to welcome our participants today. We have with us Graham Love, who is chair of the board of directors of the Royal Mint, the UK Royal Mint, which I should say is even older than the University of Oxford. Okay, also Erin Logan, who is the COO and co-founder of XO, which is a startup, and a startup that has formed a partnership with a very ancient institution, the UK Royal Mint. So XO is a company that Erin will tell us more about in a moment, but it has developed a technology that allows e-waste to be recycled. And as part of a very interesting initiative bringing the old and the new together, the Royal Mint and XO have partnered to create a new business which also addresses some of the sustainability issues that organisations like the Royal Mint face. So the first thing I would say is please, if you have questions, feel free to ask them as we go along. I know that we might get some questions online, and I'll try not to ignore the iPad in front of me, but if I do, my trusty assistant Chris is going to wave at me and tell me if you've asked a question online. So first of all, Graham, I'd like to come to you and say, why on earth did the Royal Mint decide to distract itself with a startup like XO?
Well, thank you, and firstly, thank you very much for inviting me along this afternoon. It's a great privilege to be here. This initiative goes back some years, actually. At the Mint, Erin and I and our teams have been in dialogue for, in fact, over 4 years in terms of developing where we've got to today. And I suppose from the Mint's perspective, this has been a combination of necessity and ambition. So the observant amongst you will note that people don't use coins quite the way they used to. And the Royal Mint was founded in 886 AD, making it according to the French at least, the second oldest mint in the world. The French obviously have to always be a little bit older than we are. So Monnaie de Paris claims to have been founded 20 years before, but since no one was around today from 886, I think we're pretty confident that we've been making coins for 1,100 years. We're one of the oldest institutions in the UK. And our sole purpose in life for most of those 1,100 years was to make coins for the UK. So even before the pandemic, obviously we could see coin usage was declining. And of course the pandemic accelerated that fantastically. So to give you a sense of the decline in coin usage in the UK, when I first became chairman, which was 6 years ago, we were probably doing 250 million pounds worth of business producing coins for the UK. Last year we did 8 million, out of a total revenue of 1.4 billion last year. So it's just been a complete transformation. So we had a burning platform. Yeah, the classic burning platform. We knew that our core business was in catastrophic decline. We had to do something. And so we built a number of businesses alongside that. E-waste is not the only one. But e-waste was something that was absolutely at the heart of what we were trying to do, because our brand is all around sustainability. Yeah, as an organisation, we spend a lot of time. Our people are very committed to sustainability, and we needed a source of sustainable precious metals. We'll talk a little bit later about the jewellery range, which is made wholly from sustainable precious metals. But we needed a source. And we were also conscious that around the world there are approaching 80 million tons of e-waste per year, largely dumped in landfill or burnt. So that's what prompted us to go out and say, well, okay, what can we do about this? Can we find a way of recovering precious metals in a genuinely sustainable way? And we looked around the world. We discovered our friends in XO, say nearly 5 years ago now. We started the discussion, and we built this fantastic partnership to produce very significant amounts, we hope, very scalable amounts of precious metal from e-waste. So that was kind of the genesis of the project.
Well, with a plug for the Side Business School jewellery collection, I can assure you we are going to talk a little bit later about how we're engaging with this initiative to bring something sustainable to our students. But I think a little more about that later. First of all, Aaron, I'm delighted to say that you are, in fact, an Oxford graduate. You studied the diploma in global business, and the chairman of XO is one of our executive MBA graduates. So this is very much an Oxford story. Just as Graham was looking for a company to help them address some of their sustainability objectives, you and your co-founder, Jim Fox, were busy talking to me about this entrepreneurship project idea that you had, and how you had found some technology from a Canadian university. You thought it could be licensed. You thought it could become a big business. Tell us a little bit about the ideas behind that business and how you originally thought XO would develop.
So I'd be remiss in saying, or not saying, that the founders, Hiwa and Logman, are actually the brains behind the technology. I'm just merely a steward of commercialization that they've entrusted the technology to market with. So the technology itself, if we're looking at an apples to apples comparison, there's nothing else out there in the market that is like it. And the conventional technologies that exist are, as Graham noted, literally putting it in a burn barrel, lighting it on fire, and calling that recycling. And when we looked at how to commercialize the technology, it's a little bit about what Graham mentioned as well. It's that burning platform. So you could go and you could do the commercialization yourself. You could go and you could raise the capital. You could build the plant. You can scale it up. You could build the team. But the history that I've had in commercializing technology, you always have a much better approach and a much more sure thing. I'm not going to say it's always a sure thing, because 90% of all startups fail, but that crossing the chasm is always the hardest thing. And Jeffrey Moore wrote that book about it, and everybody that's an entrepreneur knows about it. But when you have that burning platform on both sides of the pond, here in Canada and over in the UK, with the Royal Mint decline in coin usage and us saying we need to commercialize something, it became a very, very noticeable win-win partnership. And I would say that you don't really find partnerships like this in industry. This is a generational, almost a zeitgeist type moment where we both had something that was really impactful, something really meaningful, and we both had the drive to actually execute on it. And that has been probably one of the most fulfilling aspects of this partnership, is the fact that we've worked so well together and we actually both have the requirement to make a meaningful impact to the world.
So I'd just like to take you back a little bit, though, to the scientific development that allowed this to happen. So I think I'm right in saying that people do claim that they can recycle e-waste already, but you felt you had a very different technology. That technology had to be scaled up to be used in an effective way that would make a big difference. So you're not doing that, but I think the Royal Mint is hoping to do that. How did you come to the realization that perhaps scaling it up yourself was going to be very difficult, and that you would need to do it a different way?
So my background is energy, oil and gas, and I've commercialized several technologies. And each time I did the I'll call it the hubris approach, where I know best. I can build the team. I can do the manufacturing. I can go out and I can support it. I can do the field ops. I can do the sustaining engineering, the obsolescence, et cetera, et cetera. And when joining XO and commercializing the technology, they had a unbelievable breakthrough. This is a technology that's never been written about in textbooks before. This is a new chapter in chemistry. It doesn't use water. Most chemistries that are hydrometallurgical, they love water. In fact, it's a universal solvent. So this is a once in a lifetime, I hope to say, Nobel Prize winning type technology for the founders that are actually the brains behind it. But I had failed so many times and succeeded in commercializing technology. And the aha moment was joining the team and saying, okay, we have a bunch of brilliant people, but we just don't have that skill set internally. And it is that hubris that usually prevents the founders, not saying these founders, but most founders of startups say they can do everything. And it is recognizing that the size of the prize is so large. And as Graham noted, 82 million tons of e-waste are produced annually, $91 billion US worth of metals. It's currently burned. So the size of the prize is extremely large when we're looking at the environmental impacts that we're trying to avoid. The size of the prize is extremely large when you're looking at the return on investment. And finding that way to ensure it gets to market, that basis of cooperation that aligned both parties, that was what was most important about finding the critical path to execute on commercializing the technology. And we had it in Beaker, but we didn't have the core competency in-house to take it from Beaker scale to commercial scale and global deployment.
And I think that word alignment absolutely is at the core of how we've made this partnership between XO and the Royal Mint work. Because as Aaron says, XO has developed the technology. It's a unique globally applicable technology. It's fantastic. It's new. It had been proven at lab scale, and that was one of the reasons why we approached XO and said, yeah, absolutely, we'd love to work with you. But we have the capability at the Mint to scale it. So we have the space physically because we're no longer producing as many coins. So we've got quite a lot of empty space in South Wales. We have the skills of working with precious metals, which we obviously, as we said, done for 1,100 years. We have manufacturing capability because we've been manufacturing coins for many hundreds of years as well. And we have a degree of capital to put in there, both human capital and financial capital. And so our job has been to scale it. And actually we designed, so just as XO has developed this process from scratch, we have built the factory from scratch. It's a new process, never been done before. We work very closely together, so Aaron and his colleagues have come over regularly to us and vice versa as well, just to understand and work very, very closely, hand in glove together, to build what is now an operational factory in South Wales. And we expect within a very short period of time, we expect to be getting it up to full scale, which will be around 4,000 tonnes of e-waste a year, which is phenomenal from where it was, which was 4 or 5 years ago, just lab scale. It's been a fantastic collaboration to get there.
I'm sure. And the culture of an organisation like the Royal Mint is very different from the culture of a startup. And I have one question that's just come in online, which I really like about that. You know, how was it to work with these guys? You know, and how did your board see this? Because, you know, generally speaking, boards are cautious and don't like too many innovations at once. So tell us how you managed to navigate that landscape.
Well, that's a very good question, and certainly risk management is very high on our board agenda. My chair of my Audit and Risk Committee took a pretty hard-nosed look at everything we were doing as we went along, because it has been a very significant capital investment to make this work. But also, as I said earlier, we recognised we had a burning platform, we needed to do something, and this was very much on message. I think the other thing about why we're very excited about this collaboration is it is genuinely scalable. So as I said a moment ago, I think with our factory we'll be able to produce probably process 4,000 tonnes a year. There are, as Aaron's just said, 80 million tonnes around the year going into landfill or being burnt. So there's a massive global opportunity here. And our vision, our shared vision with XO is that we will roll this out, having proven the concept, having built a factory which works and can operate at scale, that this is a concept we can roll out globally. And whether we do it through franchising the technology or whether we do it actually ourselves with an operating partner, it'll probably be a hybrid of the two. But it's a genuinely scalable opportunity which has a real impact on the environment as well.
I think for most of us it's hard to get a sense of how many tonnes did you say?
So we'll be processing 4,000 tonnes a year of e-waste.
What proportion of the world's e-waste, or even of the e-waste from, let's say, the UK, is that?
Well, I'm not sure I can do the maths in my head, but if you take 4,000 and divide it by 82 million, you've got the fraction. So it's still quite a long way to go.
Some MBA students in the room. Get the calculators out now. I'm sure you've worked it out, Aaron. Come on, you're the entrepreneur. You've got some idea. Give me some visual picture here of a nation's e-waste. How much are we talking about?
It's actually interesting because Canada, we love being high and mighty about, oh, we're green, we're on the forefront of all of the greenhouse gas emission reductions in the energy industry, all the greenhouse gas emissions everywhere. But yet you look at recycling of e-waste, and I think when I joined, we were at like 8% was actually going into collection and recycling. And again, remind everybody, recycling is considered burning it in a burn barrel. It is a drop in the bucket. It is absolutely nothing. And that's not diminishing the impact that the Royal Mint is having or what XO's technology is having, but it is literally an insignificant amount. You're probably a grain of sand on a beach. And that is the interesting opportunity here. When you're looking at 8%, 10%, now 22% global collection rate, there's still 78% going into a landfill. And unfortunately, a lot of that, because it's electronic waste, there's bromines in there, there's fire retardants, there's heavy metals, there's mercuries, there's all kinds of fun stuff that you have to deal with as well. It's not just the flashy gold, it's all the other aspects that create the soil damage, the water damage. And as Graham noted, the value of the technology isn't necessarily the 4,000 tons that we're going to be processing out of Lantricent, which is about, I think, 10% of the UK market. It's the global opportunity to actually make an impact, because you can't set up a new smelter nowadays. You can't set up a $1 billion organization on the edge of a river that needs all this water run through it. You can't set up a facility like that, not in my backyard, at least not nowadays. So what is the solution for recycling of electronics in the circular economy? And I think there are other technologies out there, and there is a huge opportunity for a lot of us. And I think it's actually it's a great opportunity for us to work together. It's not just XO versus the world, or the Royal Mint versus the world, or any of our other competitors versus the world. It is a blue ocean. And
I think that's very. It's good to have that sense of, you know, it's 10% of the UK, but if you had 10% of many different countries, if you had a factory in each of X number of countries processing 10%, that would still presumably add up to a huge amount of difference for the world's e-waste situation.
It would, but I think there's a logic to starting in the UK. There's always a bit of serendipity, obviously, to starting here, but we are actually the second worst country in the world in terms of the amount of e-waste we generate per capita. So there is a logic to starting here.
Can I ask what's behind that? Why is that?
I don't. That's simply the statistics. Presumably, we're using more electronics and discarding more electronics. So, for example, government departments use a great deal of electronics. There's a significant amount of electronic waste being generated. One of our first big contracts for feedstock for e-waste has come from the Ministry of Defence, for example. So we will be taking all of their electronic waste, which isn't in their case just computers. It's obviously it's phones, it's radios, it's all kinds of material. So there is a sort of bit of an issue here in the UK in the sense that we are one of the guiltier parties. But I think also there's more of an awareness here in the UK, more concern about e-waste and about ESG generally than perhaps there is in some other countries in the world which might actually be generating more. So there's a logic to starting here. But then, as Aaron said, we have an awful lot to play for around the world. And if we can replicate it, it will actually make a significant difference.
Well, we'll come back perhaps towards the end of the session to the scale of that business opportunity. But I'm quite interested in the fact that you decided to set up a line of jewellery as a way of showcasing this. And we do have with us Charlotte, who's the product manager for, what's the company called again?
886 by the Royal Mint.
886 by the Royal Mint. Okay, I've given the plug. So, but it is absolutely beautiful stuff. And it's interesting that you chose jewellery. Give me a sense of why you did that. And does that use up all the products from the factory at the moment, or are you using the products from the factory in other ways?
So in the long term, obviously our ambition is that we can generate sufficient precious metal to be used in coin production. We have a lot of commemorative coins, for example. Some of you are aware of collections, for example, commemorating the King's birthday or other things, so collector's coins. So our ambition is that over time, we will generate more and more precious metal. But in the short term, what we wanted to do was find a way of showcasing what we were doing. It's worth saying, incidentally, that 886 by the Royal Mint is both gold and silver, and the silver is generated using used X-ray material from the NHS. So we don't recover huge amounts of silver because it's not used in quite the same way in e-waste. It is very much still sustainable silver that we're using. So it was originally conceived, we said, well, okay, how can we showcase what we're doing and how can we promote it? But it's become sort of very much a business line in its own right. Over time, obviously, it'd be nice to think that we can generate sufficient gold to do other things with it as well. But right now, this is a great way of getting it out into the market. Yeah. And there is, in fact, we have a shop. We have a retail outlet in the Burlington Arcade, so for anyone who's going there, please drop in. But it's a great way of getting it out.
I have it in my notes here that Stella McCartney is working with the Royal Mint. Is this true?
She is, whether she is personally working with the Royal Mint, she had a lot of involvement. Thank you, Charlotte. Yes, we were asked to make jewellery for Stella McCartney's collection in Paris recently, which was very exciting. And as part of that sort of building the brand globally. And I think it's because, she is clearly very much environmentally aware in everything that she does. And she's recognised that this is a sustainable way of producing jewellery, which is fantastic. It's a great collaboration.
Well, this is the week where we have COP29, and the world is thinking about climate change and sustainability, perhaps more than at any other time of the year, with all the controversies and the difficulties involved in solving that problem. How much of a piece of the jigsaw do you think this kind of solution is going to be? How do you see this fitting into global solutions for the use of energy and the way we see the use of metals being something that should be circular? The mining industry presumably likes mining gold to make more of a profit. Let's get more of it out of the ground and, instead of recycle it.
Yes, I mean, I think for us, we obviously, we've paid attention to COP29, we've listened to the Prime Minister's promises and undertakings at COP29. The Royal Mint has been on a journey in which the environment has been really, really important for many years. It's absolutely at the core of what we try to do. Our people, our team in Lantrisen are very, very concerned about the environment. We've done an awful lot of things locally. We have a local energy centre, for example. We have wind turbines and a solar farm generating the power. And it's fair to say that 6 years ago, when I joined the Royal Mint, we were not as clean as we are today. Making coins has not always been a particularly clean, environmentally clean operation. You used to have to use a lot of sort of quite noxious solvents and so on. So it was a journey we were on already in terms of trying to produce a more environmentally friendly process. But it's now very much embedded in our brand, in everything that we do. As I say, all of our people are very, very concerned about it, as I'm sure most businesses are. And this has been the circular economy, generating this sort of sustainable capability, has been a really key part of showcasing that and of demonstrating that we're taking it seriously. And as you say, mining, there is a finite amount of gold in them hills. And once it's out, it's out.
Certainly in Welsh Hills, that's
well, certainly in the Welsh Hills or the Cornish Hills for that matter. So we're trying, obviously, to substitute for what has not always been the cleanest industry in the world, which is mining.
Another question from people sending questions in online, but I think after that I'll open it up and let's have some questions as we go along. So a great question, is it more important for governments to push along the e-waste agenda through regulation, or should businesses be taking the lead?
I think it's a bit of both. I mean, the environmental agenda generally is obviously being pushed by regulation. So the reporting that all companies now have to carry out, CSRD and all those sort of initiatives that are coming from Europe, people have become very much more conscious of it. If you regulate it and measure it, it's a truism that people tend to pay attention. And if you're not having to report on it, you don't. I mean, we have, if you look at the Royal Mint's annual report, we have a very large section on our ESG reporting. We have agreed SBTi targets, in terms of emissions for the Mint going forward. So by 2030, we expect to have reduced emissions, certainly our direct Scope 1 and 2 emissions by over 40%, and by 2050 by 90% or more. So we're trying to set realistic targets. And I think it's easy to set targets. The question is, how do you actually achieve those? So we, as a board, when we sat down to look at our targets for SBTi, we very much said to ourselves, well, what is realistic? On the one hand, you want to be ambitious, but on the other hand, you want to be able to deliver it and see a way of delivering it, which is why we put our local energy centre in and all those things to help us with that. So I think there's a real drive to have an impact. But realistically, it's that sort of tension between regulation and company initiatives. And I think in our case, frankly, our staff are sort of driving us towards doing a lot of these things. People care about it. They want to work for an organisation that is environmentally, has an environmental conscience. Yeah. And so it's very much in our interest to do that, as well as being compliant with regulation.
Interesting.
There is a major aspect about this that I think all of us can attest to in the room. How many of these devices do you have in your junk drawer? Probably 4, minimum. You might even have laptops kicking around in the closet. So there is an education component to it as well. And I know a lot of us keep these devices because we don't want to have our information stolen. But there is an education aspect about it beyond just the regulatory, beyond just the business or corporate type of an approach. And that is figuring out how to make sure people are actually aware of where to take them and how to dispose of them and how to recycle them and everything around that. And One of the other reasons the UK is interesting for first market entry is they are the best in the world at collecting electronic waste. Over 50% of all the electronic waste produced is actually collected. So what do you do with it? And that's where the regulation comes in. Before, there was export to Ghana, export to Thailand, export to developing countries. And it's easier to burn it there than it is to burn it in the UK. And Canada's also, we did that as well. But now we have an opportunity and a real requirement to actually make a meaningful impact. And the zero landfill approach that we've taken, that was from the onset of how we designed everything. And you can do regulation, you can do education, but we really want to make a meaningful impact by removing it from landfill, sending nothing to landfill. All the plastics are recovered, all the metals are recovered. We don't use the same energy consumption as the smelters. They consume 4% of all the world's energy. They produce over 7% of all the world's emissions. There is a lot on the greenhouse gas emissions we can impact with the technology, but we do need government regulation to help that. And that is in the form of put a fee on it, just like a bottle. When you buy a phone, there's a $100 fee on it. You have to then return it because you know you're going to get that $100 back. So I think it is a combination of regulation, closing down the borders, regulation, not necessarily closing down the borders, but making it harder for us to export it to the developing world. That it is a combination, though.
It's interesting because entrepreneurs generally think regulation stands in their way, but in the field of sustainability and addressing net zero targets, you wouldn't be the first entrepreneur who had told me that regulation is an asset in getting your route to market. I just wondered if there were any questions from the audience at this point, and also either about the jewellery collection or about Royal Mint or about how XO got to market. So yes, question here.
My question is, I'm director of a jewellery company and we have initiative and whatever we buy from public, jewelers normally buy jewellery from public. It's all being recycled and sent to the manufacturers to remake new items for us. For me, the question is, has there been any analysis of the cost of the gold that is result of this process, whether it can be whether it can be ever be like competitive for the market, for the jewelers to buy this gold to make jewelry out of it, for instance, because I believe jewelry is one of the biggest chances for this initiative to work because you have higher markups. It's really, in my belief, I might be wrong, very naive to believe that large electronic factories will buy these recycled precious metals because of the price point. So I believe jewelry, which you did, is actually a brilliant idea, place to start. But again, is there any cost analysis for the future use of this project?
So that's a really interesting question. Let me take it, and then Aaron will doubtless add to it as well. So it's a question of scale. As we've described, at the moment, we're still scaling up. So when you're doing this at a small scale, you've obviously invested in the capital equipment, which means that everything is more expensive than it is at full scale. Once we get up to our sort of full scale, which is, as I was saying, is probably around 4,000 tonnes of e-waste a year, which will produce, I'm trying to remember how many kilos that produces of gold. You may remember, Aaron, is it about 40 from memory, something like that?
450.
Sorry, I knew I had a 4 at the start of it. Yeah, 450. So you're going to be producing a decent amount of gold at that point. And at that point, it becomes economic compared with buying stuff that has been gold that's been dug out of the ground. So there is a scale factor there. I think the other thing that we've discovered, at least, is that people actually are prepared to pay some premium for sustainable jewellery. And we're not the only people marketing sustainable jewellery around the world. But people are becoming more conscious of it. They are aware of the conditions, for example, in some of the mines. There's been a lot of sort of adverse publicity around that from time to time. So I think there is a premium. It's obviously got to be a sensible premium. It's not going to be twice the price or whatever. But I think there is also a scope there, some scope there for premium pricing around sustainable gold. So I think it's very much something which we see. Obviously, we at the moment expect to consume it all of ourselves. But as this scales, you would expect to see supply coming into the market, which was competitively priced. I
think to add to that, the jewellery market's interesting because it's most prevalently noticed by the consumer. And again, going back to the cell phone example, if you take a look at the cost of goods included in jewelry, it's all metal. If you take a look at the cost of goods put into a cell phone, it's about $1. It's about $2. So in terms of the price sensitivity of who's willing to pay more, you put 5% premium on jewelry, is that going to be consumed by the consumer, or is a 5% improvement to the cost of goods, a 5% increase to the cost of goods on a cell phone more likely to be accepted? So yes, I think jewelry is a very interesting approach, but maybe in the future, it's actually the other aspects of where we're actually getting the material from that could offer the largest premium, because that actually closes the loop entirely, electronics to electronics. And you look at the data centers that are being produced for artificial intelligence, I think it's going to become really interesting. People are going to be more mindful of the impact, Bitcoin mining, data centers, artificial intelligence, all these things. I think we're going to be very mindful of the energy consumed, but also creating that improvement to the technology in a circular manner, both through the recovery of the metals and the plastics. I think the premium might actually be larger in other industries go forward, but definitely the launch and the in-your-face aspect, this is the right path because people notice it.
Interesting. Any other questions from our audience? Yes.
Apologies for joining late. I come from the metals and mining sector, and one thing I've seen with other commodities, particularly steel, zinc, and copper, is the emergence of green accreditations. So for example, there's like a green steel index that I think LME is now tracking, or there's a green copper index. Do you think there's a world where for gold and silver, a sort of green premium actually emerges that can be tracked by the index and perhaps trade on LME? And if so, on the sort of upstream side with like accreditation for bullion producers, LBMA, is
Sorry,
there
LBMA acronym?
London Bullion
Bullion
like metals, basically accreditation for bullion producers.
Okay. We like an acronym here at the business school, but I like explaining them.
Will there be an emergence of like a green accreditation, basically, for gold and silver in the future?
I think there absolutely will, but in fact there already is, because the LBMA already has certification. I think the interesting thing is how that develops, because it's, whilst LBMA certifies sustainable sources, as we all know, sustainability can mean different things to different people. Recycling actually can mean different things to different people. As Aaron and I have been describing, you can get recycled gold that's been smelted down in an environmentally unfriendly way. So how do you measure the value of that against something which has been produced through the process we've been describing, which is environmentally friendly? So I think there are a lot of nuances here. And I think the accreditation process will develop. It will become more mature as people develop these sorts of processes and are more concerned about them. So I think there's been greenwashing has obviously been a real issue for a long time. And what we're trying to do here is actually is track back in the same way as, for example, on SBTI, you track back to Scope 3 emissions. It's trying to go right back down the supply chain and really ensure that you know where your material is coming from and how it's what the claim for sustainability is based on, whether it genuinely is sustainable or not. But there's certainly, there are certifications already, and all of our gold that we use, because we obviously don't just produce jewellery, in fact it's a fairly small part of what we do. At the moment we're producing gold sovereigns, bullion, we use a lot of gold at the Royal Mint one way or another. And all of that is certified by LBMA as being sustainable gold, but that may mean, for example, that it's being mined in an ethical way at the moment, as opposed to being genuinely circular. So this is going to develop as time goes on.
I think the interesting thing about the way, and I have to use air quotations here, recycled gold was classified in the past. It was literally anything that was a gold into another gold. So you could actually take a mined doré bar, put it into a bullion, and then melt that bullion down and then resell it as recycled. So because it was a secondary, not directly from mined virgin ore, it was deemed recycled. So the new classification that is literally in the works and about to be released by the LBMA, ISO, all the different international standard organizations that are out there, it has to be a post-consumer waste product. It can't just be a shell game greenwashing approach that people are taking now. So I think there will be a shift and there will be a premium for it, just like you noted in copper and aluminum and steel. What that premium is yet to be determined, though. And I think there is an interesting business opportunity beyond just the recovery of the valuable metals from the electronic waste. There is that credits associated with the displacement of that 7% emissions from smelting. What are those credits worth?
I think it's. I think you touched on something which we haven't really discussed yet, which is this issue of trust, and whether you can trust the certification, whether you can trust the accreditation. That's something, presumably, that at the Royal Mint you really had to think carefully about when you were debating how to go into the recycling of e-waste. I mean, finding a company with whom you could create trust and also control the production means that you're not damaging your brand. And could you say a little bit about how you, or perhaps you didn't think about it, but how you discussed those issues and thought about those issues when you were developing these ideas?
Well, I think the cultural fit, and when you're working in partnership, actually, lots of people try to work in partnership, and it's actually quite a difficult thing to do sometimes. I think, as we described earlier, we felt that there was an outstanding alignment of values as well as of financial interest in working with XO. We both looked on the world the same way. We were both concerned about ethical processes and about transparency. And transparency is really, really important. So we, at the Mint, we're part of an organisation called SEDEX, which is very much about auditing supply chains and giving us transparency on our supply chains, not just for precious metals, but all kinds of things, but obviously precious metals falls into that. And I think we felt with our colleagues at XO that we had a similar concern about ethics, but about transparency right the way through. And that is, as Aaron was saying, I mean, that is hugely important because there is so much hot air talked about sustainability and ESG in general, and it's really important to be transparent about what you're actually doing and the fact that we're on a journey. We're not 100% of the way there yet, and nobody is. But being clear with one another as to what works, and incidentally, we also, of course, we've had quite a lengthy negotiation between us as well, because there is an economic agreement between us. We have a license from XO to use the technology, and so transparency in all those things is important. Not just in the supply chain, but actually on the financial side as well. That we have mutual trust, which I like to think that we do.
Any more questions from the audience at this point? Yes.
Thank you. It's a question that's regarding, because just now you mentioned a kind of drastic drop in the usage of coins during COVID from, if I recall correctly, 250 million to about 8 million. So then, what do you see as the future of the Royal Mint? Are you thinking about, is there going to be potentially even an existential crisis in a sense that, will at some point our world just kind of be in an economic system that doesn't even have coins? So is this something that the Royal Mint thinks about, and would initiatives like this kind of help kind of pave the next steps or potential kind of new future of potentially a world whereby there might be kind of less and less usage of physical monetary devices, if you will?
I think this takes us back as well to the start, doesn't it? But you've very kindly taken it just that little bit further. Could there be a time when you're not minting coins?
So to answer the question directly, yes, it's very much something we think about, as you can imagine, having spent 1,100 years producing coins and then finding nobody wanted them. That's quite a big shift. I mean, again, to put it in perspective, you know, when I joined the Mint 6 years ago, we were making coins not only for the UK, but for 30 countries around the world, other countries who didn't have their own mints possible. So for New Zealand, for Australia, but for, you know, a whole variety of countries around the world. And indeed, up until this year, we still continue to make some coins for some overseas countries. We actually announced at the beginning of this year that we were stopping doing that. Because the way that it has worked globally is that so many countries have national mints, and most of them are operating as cost centres. The Royal Mint operates as a profit centre. You know, we're a PLC, we sat in our boardroom, it's no different from a PLC, FTSE company, the way that we run the business. My mandate from the government is to run a profitable business, and we pay a dividend back to the government at the end of it. So we operate in a slightly different way from most other national mints. I was joking earlier about Monnaie de Paris, which is the French mint who claims to be a little bit older than we are. They operate as a cost centre. So what we find when we compete with them on international contracts is that they are pricing their product on a marginal basis. So any contribution they can make to their overheads is okay by them. But we're trying to run a proper business. So you know, that means that over time, we've found that more and more mints are really driving prices down, the national mints around the world. So it's simply a market that we've got out of. Obviously, people are using less coins around the world. This is why, one of the reasons why we teamed up with XO to build this new business, and this isn't the only business. We've developed investment businesses. So, for example, we have an electronically traded fund on the London stock market, which is backed by physical gold that sits in our vaults in Lantrisen. So you can invest in gold through us in a variety of ways. You can obviously invest in gold sovereigns and gold bullion. And so we have very much, I mean, even 6 years ago, I think we recognized a decline in coin usage. But that obviously was massively accelerated by the pandemic. So as I said earlier, we had a burning platform. One of the reasons we started talking to our friends at XO was because of that burning platform. But as a result of that, we've actually created something which I hope, from the perspective of the Mint, has created a genuinely sustainable business from an economic perspective. And this business, the e-waste business, is a very important part of that going forward. It does, this maybe is partly what was behind your question, certainly I know what was behind Kate's question, does slightly beg the question of why does the UK government own the Royal Mint? Because obviously historically it's owned it because it was the producer of UK coinage. Right now, as I said, 8 million last year out of 1.4 billion was UK coinage. So you can imagine that certainly for the foreseeable future, the government has said it wishes to retain the ability to manufacture coins, because there are still parts of the community who rely on coins. And obviously, for as long as the government wants us to continue doing that, we will do that. So we've retained a capability to manufacture coins for the UK, even though at the present time we expect to manufacture very, very few. The question about whether we'll go to a fully cashless society, I'm afraid, is a bit beyond my pay grade. But almost inevitable. I think everyone understands that it's simply a question of when, not if, we do go to certainly a non-coin society. But my job has been to create a sustainable business, regardless of the environment, and hopefully that's what we've done.
And this isn't the only facility that we will jointly be making. This is obviously the first one. So the first plant built in Lantrisen is only going to be one of 5, 10, 20, 30. And this is a global partnership that we are looking at with the Royal Mint. This isn't just a one-off. So the sustainability of XO is predicated on the fact that our technology works. Well, the Royal Mint has helped us execute on that. They're producing gold off the plant today. Now, the next stage of the partnership is taking it global and actually looking for partners in Canada, US, in Africa, in India, and taking this and making a meaningful impact. Because as noted, it's a drop in the bucket today. It's a 4,000 tons out of nothing. So out of a magnitude more than anything we could possibly imagine to handle ourselves. So we're looking for ways to expand the technology together.
So I think that's a pitch, right? If anybody wants to, give Aaron a call, we have his number. So I want to bring in Charlotte here and give you a chance to say a little bit about the jewellery collection. Not just because we're selling it at the side business school, but because this is really the key part of the story and how Royal Mint has realised what it wants to do. So could you just say a little bit about the collection?
It kind of touches upon your question. So I've been with the Royal Mint for 7 years. You can probably tell that I'm Welsh. So the Royal Mint is based in Wales. It relocated in the 70s. For me, being so close to the Royal Mint, one of the big things is to retain jobs. So at the time, Sean Millard, along with the exec, identified that we needed to look for new opportunities. So one of them obviously is the partnership with XO and creating e-waste. So we have a plant which opened this year on site. The other one then was the jewellery business. So both these businesses were identified as how we see them as a fit for our existing staff. We could transition them into these new businesses. So I think so far we've had one person move across recently into our team, which obviously is super excited, and then we've got plans for more. For the jewellery, we have a new factory, brand new factory, which opened last year, and the team now, at the start, we were making a few products which started off using the e-waste gold, which the team in Canada actually extracted, so that went into our first run. Now we've been transitioning and we're making more and more products on site out of the e-waste gold and along with the X-ray silver. So 886 by the Royal Mint has its name from our origin, so 886 being circa the year we were founded. We appointed Dominic Jones, our creative director, who is an award-winning designer in his own right, to basically come up with the vision of the brand. So we have 3 collections currently. They all have a link to the Royal Mint's heritage. So we have a visitor centre in Llantrisant. We also have a museum with lots of archives. So we can always pull back, so that kind of links back to our heritage and story. But for us, it's about creating heirloom pieces. So everything has that intrinsic value and weight. So it's very good quality. Obviously, the e-waste, for us, as 886, we've won a lot of awards now for the e-waste gold and X-ray. Like, we are pioneering the jewellery brand. So to touch on recycled, so obviously everyone uses recycled metals within jewellery. For us, we like to use the word recovered, because we've recovered this from whether it is the X-ray films or whether it is the e-waste gold. So for us, it's quite an easy sell. When you're speaking to customers and you're explaining the story of how we've taken a circuit board and we've extracted, the bit of gold you can see on a circuit board is genuine gold. Like, it's such an easy sell, and for us, it's a big USP. And at the start of the journey, it didn't exist. It wasn't a done deal. Like, the e-waste gold was very in its sort of infancy itself. 886 was going to carry on without it, but actually it's literally the biggest USP for us, and it's just completely unique in its own right. And I think we've recently won another Town and Country Award, which sits proudly in our Burnton Arcade store. And then from a commercial point of view, like, we've just sold into Fortnum & Masons, which is insane. We've just completed our stint in Selfridges as a pop-up. One of the big other USPs with it, and it nods to the XO and the e-waste, is that all of our stores kind of has that laboratory vibe, and it has a bright yellow boxes, which you'll see when we go out and review the pieces with the collaboration that we've worked on. But the yellow, so our main brand is yellow. It's within the secondary branding of the Royal Mint. But it's a nod to sort of like the late Queen. So obviously she wore a lot of like saffron yellow. It's within the Royal Coat of Arms. So it has that nod back. And it's a bit of fun, to be fair. And it draws people in. In Burns Arcade, you won't miss the store. It's literally bright yellow. It's really exciting, actually. And hard sell probably from a bold point of view, because it's quite bold, but it gives it a real point of difference. So from a brand point of view, we're just, we're growing. People are sort of acknowledging and seeing 886. And Most of our press is free. So you have an amazing press office in London, but we've just been on Vogue, which is insane. So Tuteman Stack bracelet and a Tuteman. So Tuteman is one of the ranges inspired by edge lettering. So Sir Isaac Newton, which you might not know, was actually Master of the Mint. So as part of his role as Chancellor, he was in charge of the Royal Mints and the UK coinage. So it's a kind of nod to his adding milled edging and edge lettering, for example. Yeah, it's quite an exciting new business. Like I said, the last 3 years have probably been the most exciting for me at the Royal Mint, having worked on coins and other projects in the past. So yeah, anything else you wanted me to touch upon? Or any questions?
It's really interesting to hear about the drive also to protect jobs and to be very much part of the local community. And it's a story, to me, this is a fascinating story of a combination of invention and innovation. And the real entrepreneurial drive to create something new by solving a big problem, a very complex problem.
It's quite interesting because obviously we've got all this wealth of history, 1,100 years, and there are parallels between XO and 886 because we're a really entrepreneurial small part of the team. But what is also interesting is we've have a bunch of engineers, so the way we approach making jewellery is not your typical way of... So we try and strike. We try and utilise existing equipment. We had a draw machine, which is common in jewellery workshop, but it'd been sat there unused for years, and we were like, how do we make... So one of our core pieces is a cuff, and we literally draw wire from square into this bullion profile. So the first collection is inspired by a bullion, and the team literally a hand drawing. We've also got a unique feature which is inspired by Sir Isaac Newton's theories on lights. So we basically strike in what looks on the surface as, you can see there's something there, but it's very plain. When light hits it, a motif projects out. So we've commercialised it by using a heart, one of our best-selling lines. So we're trying to really put an innovative spin on jewellery, of which is a very crowded market. And for us, when there's a story behind the piece, as well as the e-waste gold, as well as the X-ray silver, people really resonate with it. And it's quite interesting within our hallmark. So if you are familiar with the jewellery background, you have to hallmark over a certain weight. We try and hallmark everything where possible. Studs tend to be a little challenging if they're very small, but we actually go out of our way to pay to hallmark things which don't need to be, to ensure we have the Tower of London, which is our exclusive logo mark. So we were originally based in the Tower of London. We then moved to Tower Hill and then to Llantrisam, but a nod back to our heritage. The other mark which we add on is the crosslet, which is a nod to the time where during Queen Elizabeth I's reign, she actually awarded that to the Royal Mint, because back in Henry VIII's time, he added a lot of copper into his coinage and debased a lot of his coins. Interesting fact, he also faced forward in his portrait, and the highest point of his coin was his nose. So he actually had a nickname of Copper Nose, because his nose would be the first thing that rubbed off. So that's, again, we've added that in as a bit of heritage and a nod to where we've been. It's features on the old round pound as well. So for us, it's these little bits of USPs and interesting features that we can add in, even if it does impact the commerciality, because we don't have to hallmark everything, but it's that little bit of extra story that, as the Royal Mint, we've been going for so many years, there's always something we can pull, and for us it's adding value and adding something to the piece. So yeah, it's very exciting. As a project manager, it's I basically work with Dominic, taking all of his concepts through to sampling, through to development. Everything is considered. So every little, proportion how it sits on you. It's just really well thought, and Dom's attention to detail is exquisite. Same as mine, to be fair. But between
That's
the
right,
team,
don't give him all the credit.
I know. But yeah, the team of engineers from the design team, production, like we've got people who, you know, used to work in MRB, which is where the new e-waste plant is. Reskilling to make jewellery, like it is quite exciting, and yeah, to your point, reskilling, and this is where we kind of between the two businesses is the way the Royal Mint is reinventing itself, and to prolong jobs.
I hope that some of you will be able to join us. I think we're having some refreshments in a moment, so perhaps if you've got some questions for Charlotte, I have got some questions for Charlotte. We'll have a chance to ask you some more questions there, but it's lovely to hear you, because you can just tell how driven and enthusiastic and energetic you are about what you're doing, which is what entrepreneurship and innovation is all about. So it's been a real pleasure to bring the Royal Mint and XO together, and to hear from you, Charlotte. And I hope that some of you will be able to join us now for a drink.
Self-plug, 886 by the Royal Mint. We've got a website. Follow us on Instagram.
Or in the Side Business School shop, I believe.
Yes, so that is one thing. So
please,
obviously we've got the jewellery collection. So we work together on using the sales, adding it onto pendant, signet ring, and cufflinks, and we've obviously been speaking again today of what additional pieces what we can add to the collection. So in silver, so sterling silver and 9 carat, yellow gold at the moment. So yeah, and they're very pretty, to be fair. There's some of our core designs within 886 which we've adapted to feature the sales on. So yeah, it's very
perhaps we
lovely
can
pieces.
go and have a little look at them now.
Yes.
So please join me in saying thank you to our guests this afternoon.